take. And I'm going to come around and I'm going to pass them out. Mr. Isley is going to help me. When you're taking this survey, you don't have to put your name on it. It should be confidential and anonymous. And I don't want you to talk with each other about your responses to the survey or the content of the survey. I simply want you to respond to the questions as honestly as possible. Fold your sheet of paper in half, come put it in this orange bin up here, and then return to your seats. Yeah, every other row is fine.
You want to start here?
Alright guys, listen up, please. Shh. The surveys are now in people's possessions. The instructions were not to talk. Don't even look at other people's surveys. Get a writing utensil. Fill out the survey, and then return it to the orange bin without talking, please.
There may not be enough copies of the survey. If you don't get one, because I didn't quite expect this many people to be here based on the last attendance, then just don't worry about it. You don't have to take it. Sit in silence. Do what you need to do. Don't talk about your survey. Just respond to the questions as honestly as possible. Fold your paper in half. Put it in the orange bin. I see.
Fold it in half. If you want to pass it down, collect it. Please, there'll be plenty of time to talk later, okay?
Is anyone else still working on the survey? All right, guys, quiet. Anybody else? All right, so I will talk about your surveys later, not the results of your surveys because I'm not going to tally them up right now. but I'll talk about why we did surveys in the first place in a little bit. But right now, I want to start with defining activism. I'm talking today about conformity and nonconformity and how that relates to the idea of activism or the practice of activism. So I had a student ask me, what is activism? And for some of you, that might seem like a silly question, but for some of you, that might not seem like a silly question. You're teenagers, you've been living in Clarkston, you've been doing the student thing for pretty much your entire lives, and you haven't had a reason to be an activist or want to be involved in or interested in activism. So let's start by defining activism so we're all on the same page. We know what we're talking about in relation to conformity and nonconformity. It's part of the video, but there we go.
Activism consists of efforts to promote, impede, or direct social, political, economic, or environmental change, or stasis with the desire to make improvements in society and to correct social injustice. Forms of activism range from writing letters to newspapers or to politicians, political campaigning, economic activism such as boycotts, or preferentially patronizing businesses, rallies, street marches, strikes, sit-ins, and hunger strikes. One can also express activism through different forms of art. Daily acts of protest such as not buying clothes from a certain clothing company because they exploit workers is another form of activism. One view holds that acknowledging privileges and oppressions on a daily basis ranks as a form of activism. Research has begun to explore how activist groups in the United States and in Canada use social media to facilitate civic engagement and collective action. The online etymological dictionary records the English words activism and activist in the political sense from 1920 and from 1915 respectively.
Okay. So, in that very long definition, we can kind of narrow it down to one specific thing. Activism is any sort of action that a person takes in order to try and change something that they see in society that they think is unjust, okay? Sometimes when we think of activism, we think about these sort of large-scale actions, right? These big protests that we hear about in history books and we hear about on the news. And that's not the only form of activism. And like they mentioned in the definition, one form of activism that you can kind of do silently and in your, the privacy of your own life is to simply not shop at a store where you know that they have unethical practices, right? You might hear about some sort of store that doesn't treat their workers well or sources materials unethically, and you might take a stand by simply not purchasing items from that store. Okay, so it doesn't have to be these large-scale demonstrations. So where do morals and values come into this? This quote that I'll read in a moment was taken from a study that was done in Australia. And that study wanted to figure out the link between our willingness to conform or not conform and how rooted our beliefs were in our morals and our values. And they concluded that people's desire to be accepted by their peers, by the majority, by society, may be canceled out or even reversed by their desire to defend a deeply held conviction. So the more your beliefs are rooted in your morals, the less concerned you are about some sort of social censure, being ostracized from a group. People are more likely to defy group norms if they have a strong moral basis for their attitude, or if they perceive they have a weak societal support for their attitude. All right, so you're more likely to stand up for what you believe in if those beliefs are deeply rooted in your morals and values. So let's look at some instances of these big movements throughout history. This is just a few, and we're going to go through them quickly because you all learned about these things in your U.S. history classes last year. So there's the women's suffrage movement, and it didn't start out as a women's suffrage movement. They weren't initially focused solely on getting women the right to vote. In July of 1948, there was a Seneca Falls Convention. It was held in New York. It was organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, and there were about 100 people in attendance. This was long before the days of like paying as much as you would for a Frappuccino to get a ticket on a megabus to go pretty much anywhere you wanted. It was a big deal in 1848 for people to travel long distance. So 100 people in attendance was a big deal. This was a big crowd then. About 2/3 of the people of women, people in attendance were women. And they didn't just address women's right to vote. They also addressed other institutional and social barriers faced by women in society at the time. And they created a document that was inspired by the Constitution, and it changed the language. A lot of the language in the Constitution references men only, and they changed it to men and women. After the Civil War, they decided to focus solely on suffrage, solely on earning women the right to vote. There was a turning point in the 1890s. So after they decided to focus on suffrage, there were two factions that formed. And neither one of them gained broad support, neither one of them were very popular, but they kept on going, kept on going. In the 1890s, there were a lot more people, a lot more middle-class women who became involved with the movement, and the two factions joined forces. And so their power in numbers allowed them to fight a lot harder. And then in August of 1920, 72 years later, 72 years after this convention in Seneca Falls, the 19th Amendment was ratified, so women earned the right to vote. If you'll remember from the kind of ridiculous definition video that I just played for you, the dictionary started recognizing the term activism in 1920. Although I don't have any proof that there's a connection there, I would be willing to bet that there is a strong connection between this fight for women's suffrage and the appearance of the word activism in the dictionary. There's the civil rights movement. There was a lot of unrest in society about the treatment of African Americans in the United States. We know that slavery was gone after the Civil War, but just because it was illegal to hold slaves doesn't mean that slaves were treated, or black people were treated equally after that. So there was a lot of unrest about the treatment of African Americans in society, especially in the South. But the two major catalysts for this big fight, this big movement to make things more equal for African Americans in society were the Brown versus Board decision and then the murder of Emmett Till. Who can tell me the Brown versus Board? What did that do? Sean?
It was the desegregation of schools in the Jim Crow states. So,
Yep.
with all deliberate speed.
Yes. So Brown versus Board overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson said separate but equal. Brown versus Board said separate is not equal, and it overturned that. So that might seem like a big victory, right? But it wasn't, because there was a real lack of enforcement in the South of this. And then in the same year, Emmett Till was murdered. Who can tell me what happened to Emmett Till? Go ahead, Grace.
Emmett Till was from Chicago, I think, somewhere in the north. He went down south for the summer to help work with his family, his uncle. He allegedly whistled at a white woman in a store, which recently was actually found out he didn't do that. She did in fact lie about that. But her husband and several other men from the town brutally beat him, like murdered him. They found him with barbed wire strapped to the big fans for like river boats going down, and for his funeral, his mother kept an open casket to show the horrific ways her son was treated.
Yeah. So he was accused by a young kid, accused by a white woman in the South of whistling her, and he was brutally murdered because of it. And his mother, as a protest to the treatment of African Americans, to show like this is happening, this is still happening and it shouldn't be happening. She took a stand by having an open casket. Thousands of people attended his funeral, and this was a major catalyst for a lot of the action that we see. The Greensboro and Nashville sit-ins, where you have African Americans and mixed race groups sitting at lunch counters where they weren't being served and refusing to move so that other people who would be served, white people, could sit down. You have the Freedom Riders, and that's protesting the segregation on buses. And then you have the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. This is the huge event where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, and this led to several pieces of legislation, civil rights acts of several years, and then also the Voting Rights Act. Vietnam War protests. So the Vietnam War happened, the U.S. started their involvement, and it started out really small. It was like a small group of college kids who were like, we don't believe that you are over there to help liberate the South Vietnamese. We think this is wrong, and they started protesting on college campuses. And then the more money the government spent on the war, and the more troops they sent over to the war, the more people started questioning the U.S. involvement. There was a large march in D.C. in October of 1967, and then the anti-war protest movement really gained major support by the American public because of two things. There was Martin Luther King Jr. openly came out about his opposition to the war, and at this point in time, this time in history, he was looked up to by a lot of people. A lot of people looked to him for guidance on how they should act and how they should think and what they should do. And then there was the Tet Offensive, which was the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese launching several attacks on South Vietnam. And so this really sparked involvement of the American people. At this point, 50% of the American public were opposed to the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Only 35% supported it, and the rest were undecided. So members of Vietnam Veterans Against the War, this group, they joined the anti-war efforts. And seeing these veterans who had come home from the war, seeing them injured, seeing them in wheelchairs and on crutches, that angered a lot of people, a lot more people. So all of these things kind of garnered more support for the movement. And then eventually in 1973, President Nixon ended the U.S. involvement in the war. And then we have present day movements that are still happening right now. There's not a long timeline with a sort of start and end to these because they're happening right now. There's the Black Lives Matter movement. This is one that's very prominent. Again, they're fueled by this sort of grief about injustice, about institutionalized racism, about African Americans in society not being treated equally or treated fairly. There were a couple of major catalysts for these larger demonstrations, and that was the murder of Trayvon Martin, an acquittal of the man who shot him, and then the next year, Michael Brown, who was killed by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. So these two events really kind of sparked this to be, a mass movement, and the protests continue. And then we have the Women's March. And this happened in January of this year. It was the largest single-day demonstration in history. It happened all over the world, mostly focused in Washington, D.C. There were an estimated 4 million people worldwide. There's no way to officially count, but people, scientists, and who study this sort of thing estimate it's anywhere between 3.5 million and 5.5 million. All right? They have, unlike the other movements that we've looked at so far, the Black Lives Matter, they're focused on racial justice, right? The women's suffrage, they were focused on giving women the right to vote. The Vietnam protests, ending the war in Vietnam. With this, it's a much broader platform, and that's because they brought a lot of these things together. It's about women, but women are also white, women are also black, women are also Muslim, women are also LGBTQ, women are also immigrants. So because we're not just women, it is much more broadly focused than that. And again, this is something that's still ongoing in activism, that's still happening today. So, activism in the United States, right? What do these people have in common? All of these people are like figureheads or major activists that you probably have heard of so far. So take a minute and think about what they have in common, other than being activists. What are they in common? Okay.
All of them have a sort of opposition against the people that dislike them. The ones that do, they didn't want that stop them. Like,
Yes.
I don't remember, I read them all, but I don't remember that the Taliban heavily disliked her.
She was going to school and they didn't want girls to go to school.
And then when the 2 years, obviously murdered, so he had some people who didn't like him either.
Okay, they all had people who didn't like them, right? What else? What are they in common? What did they do? Go ahead.
They're all minorities.
They're all, well, not all of them. Gloria Steinem, well, she's a woman. Elizabeth Cady said they're both white. They're women. Okay, they're all minorities. What else? Related to that. Go ahead. Yes, they all saw some sort of injustice in society and they stood up for what they believed in, what they held to be morally right, despite any sort of repercussions they might face for standing up for that. Society said, this is how it is, and they said, that's wrong, we need to do something about it. So where does this question about conformity and nonconformity fit into all of this? All right. How does conformity and nonconformity fit into all of this? Your focus question for this whole project and for your summer reading was, how important is conformity and nonconformity to the human condition and how do we know? A lot of people initially ask, what does that mean, the human condition? I don't know what that means. The human condition simply means part of being a person, okay? So these figureheads of movements, they're generally regarded as nonconformists. We mentioned already in their similarities that they stand up for what they believe in despite any censure they might face. And a lot of that is related to what they believe it means to be a person, right? And so they stand up for those things. People who go first take a great risk. They might get beaten, killed, ignored, ridiculed, or defamed, but our history has shown us that they might also spark something. People like the Greensboro Four and the Nashville students sparked something. So we have this group of nonconformists who are willing to stand up for what they believe to be true and right, and things that they deeply hold in their morals, right? And they're generally regarded as nonconformists. But what about conformity? And how does conformity play into it? Because I think that conformity is an essential part of activism if that activism is going to be successful. So I have a short clip to kind of illustrate this idea.
April 19th. Dynamite thrown from a passing car at 5:30 in the morning destroyed the home of Z. Alexander Louie, one of Nashville's black city councilmen and defense attorney for the arrested students. The blast was so powerful it shattered 147 windows in Meharry Medical College across the street. Miraculously, no one was killed.
It was such an outrageous act that it could be very useful to a nonviolent movement then to move, okay? It was a uniting of the city, but the outcome would be decided by how we in fact channel that energy, right? And we then had the first major march of the movement. People began to gather. And we began to march, and students came out from the lunchrooms, they came out from being on the campus grounds, and they joined, and they came out of buildings and dormitories. We filled Jefferson Avenue. It's a long, long way down Jefferson. After a while, there was a certain bit of singing, and as we came closer to town, it was merely the silence of the feet. one of the things that stood out in my mind was we walked by a place where there were workers out for the noon hour, white workers, and they had never seen anything like this. And here was all of 4,000 people marching down the street, and all you could hear was their feet as we silently moved, and they didn't know what to do, and they moved back up against the wall, and they simply stood against the wall, just looking. There was a fear there. There was an awe and they did not know what to do, but they knew that this was not to be stopped, this was not to be played with or to be joked with.
Face to face on the steps of City Hall, Reverend C.T. Vivian condemned the mayor for his failure to speak out in the past. Diane Neich pushed Ben West to take a personal stand.
They asked me some pretty soul-searching questions, and one that was addressed to me as a man, and I tried as best I could to answer it frankly and honestly, that I could not agree that it was morally right for someone to sell them merchandise and refuse them service. And I had to answer it just exactly that way.
All right. So there's something called informational influence that is it's a term that social scientists use to describe a type of conformity where we maintain or retain our moral beliefs. We don't change what we believe to be morally right and morally correct, but we conform to others because we believe that they have more information and experience on how to act about a certain situation than we do. All right, this is a functional way of defining one's position in the face of limited information. In this example here, this was in Nashville. It was during the Civil Rights Movement. It was after the bombing of this lawyer's house, and these people were mad about it. They felt this is morally wrong, this shouldn't be happening, and they aligned with each other based on those beliefs that are deeply rooted in their morals, but they didn't know what to do about it. How do we fix this? How do we stop this from happening anymore? And so when all of these people started spontaneously marching down the street with each other to talk to the mayor about this, they weren't acting out of their own information and knowledge. They were acting because other people who believed the same things that they did were doing that. Okay? Informational influence. It's a type of conformity under acceptance of evidence about reality which has been provided by others. This is different from something called normative influence, which is when we conform to what we see happening because we're afraid of not being accepted by others. In normative influence, you're changing what you might believe to be morally right or morally true so that you're avoiding being censured by your peers, by society, by the government, whatever it might be. Where's my... So what does this mean? What does this mean for activism? We understand our values and our personal beliefs, right? We understand the way that we feel about gay marriage. We understand that. We know that we feel a certain way about it. We know that that opinion is deeply rooted in our morals and our beliefs, but we may not necessarily understand how to take action when we feel like our beliefs about gay marriage, whatever they may be, might be threatened. Sometimes we don't know what to do about that, right? So we look to other people or groups who hold those same beliefs and values to be true and determine the correct way to respond. In the case of the Civil Rights Movement, and anytime there have been mass movements before social media, there was a reliance on other types of media and other forms of communication getting the word out there. What I think is the most important form of expressing or spreading the word about these organizations or these people or these groups that can help us understand what to do, how to act when we feel like our morals or beliefs or values are being threatened. We can find them via social media. There's so much out there. And they often come in forms of, like, they ask you questions like, do you feel this way? Do you feel this way? Do you not know what to do about it? Well, let me tell you what to do about it. There's something called countable, because you can use countable to read clear and succinct summaries of upcoming and active legislation, directly tell your lawmakers how to vote on those bills by clicking yay or nay, follow up on your elected officials voted on bills so you can hold them accountable in the next election cycle. You have specialty groups, something like the Michigan Education Association, where they're focused specifically on issues related to education. If you know that education is important to you, you might follow a group like this, and they'll tell you, this is what's happening in Congress, and this is what you should do about it, right? So we look to those groups or those people who have more information and know how to act so that we can act accordingly. So conformity. A lot of the Socratic seminars that I listened to, especially at the beginning of the year when we were talking about Gladwell, talked about how conformity is a bad thing. And generally, when we think about conformity and nonconformity, we associate conformity with compromising who we are and our individuality for the sake of being liked by a group, whatever that group may be, right? We want to fit in, we want to go with the majority. And so that's looked at as a bad thing. If you compromise who you are in order to fit in with a group, then you are considered bad or wrong or not an individual or not unique. And nonconformity is good because you're not just going along with whatever everybody else tells you you should be doing. I don't think conformity is such a bad thing, especially when we look at something like activism. If we go back to all of those movements that have been successful in the past, we look at the fight for women's suffrage, we look at the civil rights movement, we look at the Vietnam War protests. How did they end? What happened? Women got the right to vote. In the case of the civil rights movement, there were several pieces of legislation that were passed, and things became better. Not perfect, but better. And in the Vietnam War protests, obviously we ended our occupation in Vietnam. So without people conforming based on informational influence, right? The idea that we are still holding our morals and beliefs, we're maintaining those, we are not compromising who we are as people, but we might need some guidance on how to act and respond. Without that force behind all of these movements, they would never have been successful. By publicly aligning themselves with an attitude, people are able to remind themselves as well as other people what they stand for. It's not a bad thing. All right? It helps us understand ourselves better. It helps us more effectively define our own values. It helps us learn how to enact change. If I see something that I don't believe in, how do I change it? It helps us learn how to be leaders so that you might be looked up to by the next group of people who get upset about something that you get upset about.
I'm an activist, but it's hard to process so much death and pain sometimes.
Like the thought that I could have a son and he could just be taken from me at any minute, and people expect me to just kind of sit there and be passive about it. Like, who wouldn't be angry about that?
I'm an activist, but I'm not angry. I just get angry when people are ignorant. You know, the world won't change just because we wish it to. Like, we'll have to work to make it happen. And that work is like hard and slow and painful sometimes, but it requires like real work to change things.
I'm an activist, but I don't speak for all Black women. It's just like the many different crossroads that Black women sit at. So I'm a Black woman, but I relate to Black girls. I live in a world of semi-privilege.
I'm an activist, and sometimes I'm angry because there should be justice. Why are we We always have this discussion because we should have justice.
I'm an activist, but a lot of the things that I stand up for, I never experienced firsthand.
Activism is a commitment to figure out how to change the world to be a better place, and that comes in many forms. There's no one type of activist or one type of activism.
The idea of equality isn't something that's just an idea, it's something that we can actively change, we can make happen.
I want for my kids and my nephews and nieces to be able to be comfortable in this world.
I have the luxury of choosing to be an activist, and I think more people should choose to be an activist on any level.
I'm an activist, but I use comedy as my vehicle of change. Comedy is about truth, so it helps me to be honest. This way people can see the truth and laugh about it, but maybe they think about it later and say, maybe that's something that needs to change.
I'm an activist, and without justice, there will be no peace.
I'm an activist, and I think that social media does affect real change.
I'm an activist, but I'm not always conscious of it.
I'm an activist, and I am super shy.
I'm an activist, and I know if the movement is bigger than me, and it's bigger than you, it'll take all of us to win.
All right. So, activism. For activism to be successful, we need those nonconformists. We need those people who notice an injustice in society and they stand up for that injustice. They stand up for what they believe in. They stand up for those beliefs that are rooted in their morals, despite whatever censure they might face. We need those nonconformists to help us understand that there is a problem, right? And when we can identify with those nonconformists, we need those conformists to say, hey, I believe that too, but I don't really know exactly what to do about it. Can you help me? And the power in numbers that's created by conformity and nonconformity working together is how social change happens. Do you guys have any questions?